Hello, students. Welcome to the final exam review for Marketing 3336. Today, I'm going to go through a few of the key elements to the final examination. I really just go through a little bit about what to expect on the exam, what are some of the focal areas that you should be reviewing for the exam, and how you might best approach studying for the final examination. So today, let me start off by going through some of the exam rules. Much like the midterm examination that you took in this class, we are going to be using the Respondus Lockdown browser. You have to make sure that's installed and functioning on your computer in order to be able to take the final. You can't just open it with a regular browser. You have to open it with a Respondus Lockdown browser. You need to make sure that the webcam and the audio are both active and activated during your exam. If your webcam and audio are not active and activated, it will invalidate the exam. So you need to make sure both of those are active and working. You're going to need a student ID or driver's license or some form of government ID to validate yourself at the beginning of the session. So make sure that you have your ID available. And I would also make sure that you have plenty of time and you've set yourself up and are ready to go for the final examination. As far as the exam structure, it's going to be like the midterm where we have 50 questions that are multiple choice questions. They're going to be distributed across the last half. So this is a final, but it's not cumulative, meaning it's only the second half of the course. So it doesn't focus on the material that we studied for and looked at for the midterm. This is just the last half of the class. So chapters 10 to 18 will be included on the final examination. Note that a lot of the exam is going to come from my lecture material and areas of focus from my lectures, but you might want to review also the textbook. And if you've been reading the textbook, that's going to be very helpful. Chapters 10 to 18. I posted all the PowerPoint slides throughout the semester. You can reflect on those PowerPoint slides from each session, my videos from each session, and then this material that I'm posting today. A few tips for the final. First of all, really focus on the core focal areas of class coverage. So if I covered material in class sessions, it's very likely to be the areas that are on the exam. I'm going to be spending the vast majority of the exam questions on material I exactly covered in my lectures. So if you looked at the lectures, you reviewed the lectures and know them, you should do quite well. You should review the PowerPoint slides that I've posted throughout the semester. The ones I'm posting today for this final exam review are going to for sure be areas of focus, but there's going to be stuff that comes from the lecture slides as well and from the materials that I use throughout the semester. You also make sure you know these interviews that we watched with our guest speakers. I always pull a few questions from interviews with guest speakers, so you should at least know who these guest speakers are and who they work for, and a little bit about that interview. So read your textbooks, chapters 10 to 18. If you need to make sure that you have access to the textbook itself so that you can look at the glossary. So at the end of each chapter, there's a glossary, and that glossary comes up with familiar or key words. So you want to look at those keywords and get to know them, because a lot of times what happens is people don't know key terms or key words. So in the scenario or multiple choice scenario questions, students miss those questions because they don't know the definition of key words that are in the book or are being used throughout the lecture period. So really focus in on the material that I discussed here. And now let me get into chapter by chapter a little bit about the core highlight areas that you might want to focus on. So let's go to chapter 10. So chapter 10 is the first of two chapters on the topic of pricing. This chapter introduces the concept of pricing in the 4 Ps and in the marketing principle. And it talks about understanding and capturing customer value through pricing strategies. So let's talk about how the core areas of this you might want to focus in. First of all, you really should know this figure. This talks about a lot of the summary information on pricing strategy. So you see on the left here, there's a product costs. That's what we call the floor price. So how much it costs to actually produce your product or to generate your product is typically seen as what we call the price floor. If you charge below that price floor, then you start to get negative margins. So the way we make money is by charging above that floor. So that's the bottom line or the lowest we could charge. On the other extreme side, these are customer perceptions of value. This is what we call the price ceiling. So at this point of the highest level of price, this is where demand stops to go away. Customers don't want the product anymore. It's too expensive for what they're getting for it. And so they don't see value in it anymore. And so they stop buying it. So in between those 2 points is where we want to be able to settle on a price. And we have to think about things like competitor strategies, marketing strategy, objectives, and a little bit about the demand and the market demand and mix to be able to think about things here. So this really helps us to get the right pricing strategies. So next in this chapter, we think about customer value-based pricing. This is one of the big areas that chapter 10 talks about. So in this, we have two strategies. We either have what we call the cost-based pricing or value-based pricing. That I think you should know the difference between cost-based and value-based, and what does it mean when we say cost-based pricing or value-based? And what's an example of an application of this? This would be important for you to know for the exam. Now moving on to the second chapter on pricing, that's chapter 11. It's called Pricing Strategies, Additional Considerations. It extends our discussion of the pricing concept. Here, you should really understand these 5 core product mix pricing strategies: product line pricing, optional product pricing, captive product pricing, byproduct pricing, and product bundle pricing. Understand what those are, and if I provide an example, you should be able to identify what these are given that example. Okay. This is initiating a price change, either a price increase or a price decrease. You should understand why companies initiate these price changes and what motivates them, and what the resulting impact of these price changes are to the marketplace. Let's move to chapter 12. Chapter 12 talks about marketing channels. And when we think about marketing channels, we think about supply chain and value delivery networks. So the supply chain is where we make and sell. So this view includes the firm's raw materials, their productive inputs, the factory capacity. So it's how product is supplied. Demand chain, on the other hand, is how we respond to that market. So this view suggests that planning starts with the need to target the customer and plan to be able to sell to that downstream customer. So one is upstream and the other is downstream. When we think about channel design alternatives, one of the things we think about are some of the areas of what we call marketing intermediary strategies. There are 3 focused ones that I really would like you to know the difference between: intensive distribution, exclusive, and selective distribution. Really know the difference in these and then the application of these to scenarios. So if I give you an example, know which one of these distribution strategies it is. Let's move to chapter 13. Chapter 13 focuses on retailing and wholesaling. There's a lot of material that I'd like you to know in this chapter because it's pretty instrumental to the course, but also to many of the strategies in marketing. So when we talk about retailing, one of the core principles to know about is what we call omni-channel retailing. That's a seamless cross-channel buying experience. That is buying across all kinds of forms of shopping. That could be in-store, online, mobile. It's to be able to create a full shopping experience for the customer. So to get them to be able to buy any way they'd like to be able to purchase. So digital technologies are really used now to be able to create what we call this omni-channel retailing experience, where we integrate all the capabilities of the way we engage with that customer. So the next thing I'd like you to know is the types of retailers. I've provided some examples here of specialty, department, convenience, superstores, and category killers. Know some examples of those and know what these mean. This is a very core concept in marketing. It's also a core concept in business and retailing. You should be familiar with this. Next, I talk a little bit about the different organizational approaches in retailing, ranging from the corporate chain, the voluntary chain, the retailer cooperative, and the franchise organization. understand the differences in what these are and some examples of each of these types of organizational approaches. This part is actually quite important, and it builds off of some of the really early work in our book. So this is thinking about the retail strategy. It's very similar to what we've learned before, which is thinking about segmentation and targeting and differentiation and positioning. Know those terms. We've used those and we studied for those in the last exam, but we haven't thought about them with regard to the retailing decisions. So these strategies drive into the retailing marketing mix decisions, and then thus create value for our retailing customers. Now we move to chapter 14, engaging customers, consumers, and marketing customer value creation. So here, this is what we call IMC, integrated marketing communication. And in this chapter, what we think about is all the different forms or tools of promotion that we can utilize to be able to sell into the markets. Advertising, personal selling, PR, direct and digital, sales promotion. Understand what each of these are and how these can all work together to be able to create a communication strategy and how we communicate our value to our customers. So this is the steps in effective marketing communication. I'll probably have a question on this, and you should understand what these steps are in effective communication, starting with identifying the target audience and finally selecting the message. So understand these steps and understand how these can be applied to be able to create effective marketing communications. The next is chapter 15. This is advertising and public relations. So we're starting to break down some of those elements of the integrated marketing communication. So in this chapter, chapter 15, we talk about different types of advertising objectives, from informative to persuasive to reminder. I actually showed you some examples of videos in the lecture so that you'd be familiar with these different types of strategies. Understand those, understand how they can be applied to different situations. Here's a very foundational concept when we talk about advertising strategy, which is reach, frequency, impact, and engagement. What do those mean, and how can they be applied to advertising? That's going to be important for you. And then what are the major PR? And this is now getting into public relations. What are the major PR tools that are out there? If I gave you a couple examples of these and I asked you which of these are public relations tools, would you know those? Would you know how PR could be utilized in a marketing function? Moving to chapter 16 on personal selling and sales promotion. This really focuses on the salesperson, how they sell and how promotions are created for organizations. So know the definition of personal selling. What is personal selling? So what is it to have a salesperson selling in to a customer? Why do companies use personal selling? Understand the difference between outside, inside, and team selling. What's the difference in these types of selling situations? And why do companies use an outside, inside, or team sales organization? As far as sales promotion, moving from personal selling to sales promotion, what is sales promotion? And why do companies use sales promotion? Why do they leverage these promotional tools to be able to bring in customers into the marketplace? Chapter 17, here we get into digital, online, and social media, sort of this new marketing element. And in this chapter, you should know the definition of direct and digital marketing. Should be pretty straightforward for you to be able to understand that. But we also should understand a little bit about why there's a rapid growth in this digital marketplace. Understanding how it's a fast growing market, why people are moving to the internet to be able to market and buy product. That's going to be very important. This is an important concept to talk about how traditional interfaces with digital. So when we think about traditional marketing, it's like face-to-face, direct mail, telemarketing, very traditional mechanisms. And then we have digital, where we have online, we have social media, mobile. How do those interface? So this really understand the differences in those two concepts. And then understanding what we call this multi-channel marketing, or multi-channel and use of multi-channels in the digital age. It extends this concept that we talked about a little bit earlier. Now, finally, let's get to chapter 18. In chapter 18, here we talk about competitive advantage. So we think about creating competitive advantage and how is competitive advantage created by a company? How do we generate or develop competitive marketing strategies? So here's a few examples of what we call competitors' objectives and competitors' strategies. This is helping us to understand what the objectives are that a competitor would bring to the marketplace, ranging from market share growth to cash flow. So if I gave you a few examples of these, would you understand what these are? Do you understand this terminology? That's going to be very important for you under the competitor objectives. And as far as assessing competitors, how do we evaluate the strength or the capability of competitors? And then another element to understand is differentiation strategy and focus strategy. To be able to understand how to differentiate, how a company focuses its effort on core focal marketplaces. A few final thoughts for the exam. So that's chapters 10 to 18. A few final thoughts. Be sure to download your Respondus Lockdown browser, really important. Make sure your webcam and also your audio is working and turned on during the examination. Make sure you have your ID ready, be able to take the full time to be able to set yourself up. A couple key things. We do monitor on this final academic honesty. So unfortunately, every single final, we end up getting several people that cheat and we end up having to fail people in the course. I don't like to do that at all. I'd rather have everybody be successful and do well in this final. And so let's try to do our best to have academic honesty here. No sharing of content or materials, no posting materials on anywhere like Group B, any type of share site. That type of stuff always ends up coming back to me or to one of the TAs, and then we end up being required to report that. So please don't do that. Make sure you use closed book, no notes during the exam, no access to the internet during the exam, no searching on websites or anything like this, like Chegg or anything like that. The university has a policy agreement where when you run a Respondus Lockdown browser, it also searches Chegg to see if the people's IP has been on at the same time and reports that stuff. So let's really try to stay away from any of that thing. Do your best on the final examination. And I really appreciated working with you this semester. I've gotten to know many people during office hours. It's great to know you, and I hope everybody does well on this final, and I hope to see you around on campus. Take care and have a great break.